Something is happening quietly in neighborhoods, rural lots, and suburban backyards across the country. Regular salaried workers, teachers, nurses, office managers, government employees, people with steady paychecks but no generational wealth, are building their own homes. Not buying, building. And a surprising number of them are choosing the exact same roof style to do it. Welcome back to Tiny Homes World. The single slope roof. One flat-angled plane, sloping in one direction. No ridge, no valley, no complicated geometry. And that one design decision is changing what's financially possible for people who earn a wage and want to own something real. But here's what the clickbait version of this story leaves out. This path is not easy, it is not for everyone, and there are serious risks that nobody talks about in the highlight reel. Today I'm going to tell you the whole truth. If you're an employee thinking about building your own home, or you're just trying to understand why this trend is exploding right now, stay until the end, because I'm going to cover the one financial calculation that determines whether owning a building actually saves you money or quietly costs you more than a mortgage ever would. Don't skip it. Hit subscribe and let's get into it. Let's start with some context, because this trend doesn't exist in a vacuum. Home prices in most markets have been climbing faster than wages for over a decade. The average home price in the United States crossed $400,000. In Australia, major cities regularly see median prices above $800,000. In the UK, the situation is similarly brutal for first-time buyers. Meanwhile, wages, especially for salaried workers in non-tech industries, have not kept pace. The traditional path of work hard, save a deposit, get a mortgage, buy a house is genuinely broken for a large portion of the working population. Not because people aren't trying, because the math no longer works the way it did for previous generations. So people are going sideways. They are looking for the path that isn't on the map. And increasingly, that path leads to a piece of land, a set of building plans, and a single slope roof. Now, you might wonder, why employees? Why not entrepreneurs or self-employed people? The honest answer is, self-employed people often have more financial flexibility but less bankable income. Employees have the opposite situation. They have documented, consistent, verifiable income, which matters enormously when you're trying to get a construction loan or land loan. Banks like employees. The pay stub is predictable. The employment history is traceable. That predictability gives employees access to financing that a freelancer or small business owner with variable income often cannot qualify for. And the people who are building these single-slope homes are almost always financing the land purchase at minimum. Very few people are paying cash for everything from the start. But here's the second reason employees are specifically drawn to own a building, and it's less financial and more psychological. Employees, by definition, spend their working hours building someone else's vision, someone else's product, someone else's company. There is a deep, very human desire among a lot of working people to build something that is completely and unambiguously theirs. The single-slope house, sitting on land they own, built with their own decisions and in many cases their own hands, is the most direct answer to that desire that exists in the physical world. I've spoken to people who've done this build, and almost universally, the psychological dimension of it, the ownership, the agency, the sense of having made something real, matters as much to them as the financial calculation. Sometimes more. The third reason is time. Employees with standard working hours have weekends. They have evenings. They have annual leave. The owner-builder model, especially at the smaller scale that a single-slope structure typically represents, is designed to be executed in exactly those pockets of time. This is not a coincidence. The design simplicity of a single-slope roof exists precisely because it reduces the complexity of the build to something a non-professional can manage across weekends and holidays without losing the structural thread of the project. Let me make sure we're all looking at the same thing, because single slope gets used interchangeably with a few other terms that can cause confusion. A single slope roof, also called a monopitch roof, a skillion roof in Australia, or a shed roof in North America, is a roof with exactly one flat plane that slopes in one direction. There is no peak, no ridgeline where two planes meet. Water falls off one edge. That's it. This is architecturally distinct from a gable roof, which has two slopes meeting at a central ridge. It's distinct from a hip roof, which has four slopes. It's distinct from a butterfly roof, which slopes inward to a valley rather than outward to an eave. The single slope is the geometrically simplest roof form that can be applied to a rectangular building. And that simplicity is everything. Because a single slope roof has no valley, no internal corner where two roof planes meet. It has no valley flashing. Valleys are statistically one of the most common sources of roof leaks in residential construction. Remove the valley, and you remove a major failure point. Because it slopes in one direction, drainage is entirely predictable. Water goes one way. You know exactly where it's going, you know exactly where to put the gutter, and you know exactly how to design the site grading below it to carry that water away from the foundation. And because it's a single flat plane of framing, the structural engineering is significantly simpler than a complex multi-pitch roof. Simpler engineering means simpler material lists, simpler labor, and simpler inspections. Now let's talk about money in detail, because this is where the honest conversation needs to happen. When employees decide to own or build a single slope home, they are making a specific financial bet. The bet is, the money I save by acting as my own general contractor, and in some cases doing some of the labor myself, will outweigh the premium I pay in time, learning curve, mistakes, and financing costs. Sometimes that bet pays off. Sometimes it doesn't. Here's how to tell which situation you're in. The typical cost of hiring a professional builder to construct a home is, depending on your region, somewhere between 15 and 30% higher than the pure material and subcontractor cost of the same home. That 15 to 30% is the builder's margin, their fee for coordinating trades, managing the schedule, carrying the project risk, and providing their license. When you own a build, you capture some or all of that margin. On a $200,000 construction budget, that's $30,000 to $60,000 in potential savings. That's real money. That's a significant part of a deposit on a second property. That's years of mortgage payments. It's not imaginary. But here's what erodes that saving in practice. First, material waste. Professional builders know exactly how much material to order. Owner builders, especially first-timers, tend to overorder on some items and underorder on others, leading to return trips to the supplier, wasted offcuts, and materials that sit on site exposed to weather longer than they should. A realistic waste factor for an owner builder doing this for the first time is 10 to 15% above what the plans specify. Second, the cost of your time. This is the calculation most people skip entirely, and it's the one I told you I'd come back to. If you earn $35 an hour at your job, and you spend 600 hours over 18 months managing your build, making calls, doing site visits, reviewing quotes, coordinating inspections, that is $21,000 of your labor valued at your employment rate. You didn't pay that money out, but you spent that time. Whether that's worth it depends entirely on what you value and what else you would have done with those 600 hours. Some people find the process deeply rewarding. Others find it relentlessly stressful. Know which one you are before you commit. Third, financing costs. Construction loans are more expensive than standard mortgages. They typically carry higher interest rates, have shorter terms, and require draw schedules tied to build milestones, meaning the bank releases money in stages as work is completed and inspected, not all at once. If your build takes longer than planned, and most owner builds do, you pay more interest for that extended period. A 6-month delay on a $150,000 construction loan at a typical construction loan rate can add several $1,000s in financing costs. Fourth, mistakes. Every owner-builder makes mistakes. On a first build, serious mistakes. A footing poured in the wrong location, a framing member installed incorrectly, a window rough opening cut to the wrong dimension, can cost thousands of dollars to correct. These are not hypothetical. They happen on almost every first-time owner build to some degree. The honest math looks like this. If you're disciplined, organized, willing to learn aggressively, and have reliable tradespeople you can call on, owner building a single slope home can genuinely save you $20,000 to $50,000 compared to using a full builder. If you're disorganized, overly optimistic about your own time, or in a market where good trades are hard to book, you might save half that, or break even. while adding 2 years of stress to your life. That's not a reason not to do it. It's a reason to go in with your eyes open. Given all those risks I just outlined, the single-slope roof is specifically chosen by smart owner builders because it reduces the number of places where things can go catastrophically wrong. Let me give you concrete examples. Roof framing on a single-slope structure is a series of parallel rafters all cut to the same length and the same angle. Every single rafter is identical. That means once you've correctly cut the first one and confirmed the angle is right and the length is right, you use it as a template and cut every subsequent rafter from the same pattern. There's no variation, no calculation required for each individual piece, no hip rafter that requires compound angle cuts. For an owner builder who is doing some of their own carpentry, this is the difference between a manageable task and a nightmare. The wall height differential created by a single slope roof, where one wall is taller than the opposite wall, is actually a design advantage in the hands of a smart builder. The taller wall is almost always the north-facing wall in the southern hemisphere, or the south-facing wall in the northern hemisphere, which means it's the wall that sees the least direct sun in winter. Placing clear-story windows, high windows near the top of that tall wall, allows winter sunlight to penetrate deep into the interior of the home, reducing heating costs passively. This is not a coincidence. The single-slope geometry happens to align well with passive solar design principles. The drainage simplicity I mentioned earlier also matters for the owner-builder during construction. On a complex multi-pitch roof, you need to get valley flashing right during the build because a mistake there will cause water damage to the structure below. On a single slope, the roof drains off one edge into one gutter. The risk surface is dramatically smaller. And from a building approval standpoint, which matters enormously because every stage of a build in most jurisdictions requires inspection sign-off before you can proceed, a simpler structural system is easier to get approved. Inspectors understand it. Engineers can certify it quickly. The single slope rarely generates the kind of structural back and forth that complex rooflines do. Beyond the financials and the construction mechanics, there's a lifestyle dimension to this that deserves honest discussion. Employees who own a build are fundamentally choosing to run a second job for 12 to 24 months while maintaining their primary employment. That is the reality. Managing a build, even a small single-slope structure, requires consistent attention, regular decision-making, and the mental bandwidth to track dozens of moving parts simultaneously. This has real implications for relationships, for health, and for work performance. The people who do this successfully tend to share certain characteristics. They are organized. They are comfortable with uncertainty. They have a partner or support system that is genuinely on board with the process, not just nominally supportive but actively involved or at minimum genuinely accepting of the time and energy it requires. And they are good at asking for help. That last point is important. There is a version of the owner-builder identity that becomes too prideful. The person who insists on doing everything themselves, doesn't want to admit they don't know something, won't hire a professional when the task genuinely requires one. That person ends up with a build that takes twice as long, costs more than expected, and has quality issues that they have to live with for years. The successful owner-builders are humble about what they don't know. They research obsessively. They join owner-builder communities online and in person. They talk to people who've done it. They hire licensed tradespeople for the work that legally requires a license, electrical, plumbing, and in most jurisdictions gas, and they learn as much as they can about everything else. The single-slope structure supports this approach because, as I said, it keeps the complexity manageable. A person with moderate DIY competence, real dedication, and a willingness to learn can genuinely take on meaningful parts of this build. That is not true of all residential construction types. Let me paint a realistic picture of what this looks like in practice for a working employee. Year 1, typically, is about the land and the plans. Finding a suitable lot, securing financing for the purchase, working with a draftsperson or architect on plans that meet local council or building department requirements, and getting those plans approved. This phase takes longer than almost everyone expects. 6 months for plan approval is optimistic in most jurisdictions. 9 to 12 months is more typical. During this phase, the employee is still fully employed. They are spending evenings and weekends on the project, researching, making calls, attending pre-application meetings, gathering quotes from tradespeople. Year 2 is the build itself. For a modest single-slope structure, let's say 60 to 90 square meters, a well-organized owner-builder with reliable tradespeople for the licensed work can realistically reach lockup stage in 6 to 9 months of weekend and holiday effort. Lockup means the structure is weathertight, roof on, windows in, doors hung, but not finished internally. The internal finishing phase, plasterboard, flooring, cabinetry, fixtures, painting, is where owner-builders often regain significant time because much of this work is learnable, doesn't require a license, and can be done in short sessions after work or on weekends. It's also where the aesthetic decisions happen, which many owner-builders find the most satisfying part of the entire process. Total timeline from first land search to moving in. 2 to 3 years is realistic for a first-time owner-builder maintaining full employment. Some people do it faster. Many take longer. 3 years is a reasonable expectation that won't break you psychologically if you hit it. I told you I'd come back to the financial calculation that determines whether this is worth it. Here it is. Take the total cost of your finished owner-built home, land, construction, financing, your realistic estimate of waste, mistakes, and extended timeline costs. Add the dollar value of your time at your employment rate for every hour you genuinely spend on this project. Now compare that total to the market value of the finished home. Not what you hope it's worth, what comparable homes in that location are actually selling for. If the market value is significantly higher than your all-in cost including your time, we're talking 20% or more, you've created genuine equity and the project made financial sense even accounting for your labor. If the market value is roughly equal to your all-in cost including your time, you've essentially paid yourself your employment wage to build a house, which is fine, but it's not the wealth-building windfall that the YouTube highlight reels suggest. If the all-in cost exceeds the market value, which can happen in markets where land is expensive, construction costs are high, and the finished home is no more valuable than a comparable purchase would have been, you've broken even on money and paid with time. That might still be worth it for the lifestyle and the satisfaction, but you should know that going in. This is the calculation that most owner-build content skips. Not because it's complicated, but because the answer isn't always exciting. Do the math honestly before you commit. Employees are building single-slope homes because the traditional path to ownership has become genuinely inaccessible for a large portion of working people. The single slope is not a trend or an aesthetic preference. It's a rational response to a financial problem. It reduces complexity, reduces cost, reduces risk, and keeps the build within reach of someone doing it while holding down a full-time job. But it is hard work. It requires honesty with yourself about your capacity, your finances, and your timeline. The people who win with this approach are the ones who go in clear-eyed, not starry-eyed. If this video gave you a clearer picture of what's actually involved, please like it. It helps this content reach the people who need it. Leave a comment with where you are in your own build journey. I read every single one, and the questions you ask shape what I cover next. Subscribe if you want to follow the honest version of this conversation. No highlight reels. No fake savings numbers. Just the real picture. See you in the next one.